My students love to give me scenarios. They love to apply a moral theory to as complicated a situation as they possibly can. That's what all of us like to do. Perhaps it's to test the boundaries of the moral theory. Perhaps it's to try and find holes. Perhaps it's to try to prove to ourselves that morality is complicated and that no one theory can be right. Well, whatever the case is, today I'm going to try and give you the tools that the Catholic Church, that the tradition of the Church has given to us to discern the sources of morality in an action. That sounds a lot more technical and a lot more complicated than it really needs to be for the average person to understand. Look, morality is real. It's real. It's not the icing on the cake. It's not the capstone. It's not just something that we're making up after we've got the table set for dinner. It's really the core, the foundation, the bottom of everything. Morality really is everything because every act that we do in our lives is moral. Did you know there's no such thing as a morally neutral action? Now, if you thought of morality in terms of deontology, as we covered in the first lesson, then you would think, well, anything that's not covered by a commandment, prohibited or commanded positively, that must be morally neutral ground. Absolutely not. You know now that that's not the case. We think of morality in terms of teleology, in terms of bringing us either closer to or further away from our final end, which is God. Then we can realize that there aren't any morally neutral actions, which is both good news and bad news. The good news about there being no morally neutral actions is that nothing in your life is meaningless. You may have heard that from a person of faith before. Nothing that you do is just, could have been one way, could have been the other, who cares? Nothing is empty. Now, the bad news, or at least the intimidating part of this, means that every single choice that we make has some kind of moral value that either does us good or does us harm. Does others good or does others harm. So there aren't any morally neutral things. That means that all of your decisions are now infused with importance, with meaning. How do you discern when an act is right and when an act is wrong? I'm not yet talking of conscience. I'm certainly not talking about a little voice in your head. And if you're one of those people who thinks morality is just the opinions of many or the agreement of a society, then certainly this won't be a very interesting conversation for you, because that means you don't think that morality is real. That means you don't think that objective truth about the good of the human person exists. And that's a much more difficult conversation to have, and not one that we're having at this point on the third lecture together in morality. Today we're going to examine the sources of morality, and I'll use a little bit of language that sounds technical at times, and it is, but that technicality is aiming at accuracy. Don't lose the forest for the trees. Keep your feet on the ground. Keep your feet on the ground. That's what I tell students all the time with morality. We're just applying reason to the revelation that comes to us from Scripture and from the Church about what is the truth about the good. So let's go ahead and get into this. Every moral action that is done by a human person, that is to say, every action that you do on purpose, every action that you do freely, that's a human action. That's an action that you can take responsibility for. If you're just sort of scratching your beard, or if you're doing something without noticing it, if you're sleepwalking, for example, then that's not truly a human action because your will is not behind it. Augustine calls those acts of man. Yes, it is a man who's doing the act, but it's not a human act. It's closer to our animal nature. It's unconscious, it's unthinking, it's unwilled in some way. So those actions we're going to be sort of leaving off the table. Not that they're morally neutral. There's no such thing as that. So for example, if I'm sleepwalking and I get into my car and I drive over a neighbor, even though I was asleep while I was doing it, the neighbor is still run over. He's still flattened on the pavement. And if I suddenly wake up and go, oh, I'm so sorry, I was asleep, it doesn't mean that he'll crawl up from the road and go, well, okay, I didn't know that you didn't intend it. Never mind. Right? So there aren't any morally neutral actions, but there are actions that we take that we're not directly responsible for if our will isn't behind them. But that's getting ahead. So let's speak of every action that has the will behind it. Where does its morality come from? What are the ways that we can evaluate an action? I'm going to suggest to you that after you know those scenarios of, well, what should I do if it's a a holy day, but I can't go to church because I sprained my ankle, but the pain's not really that bad. If I took some drugs, I could overcome it, but my mom's in the house and she needs me to help her with this. You can spin up any scenario that you want. The trolley problem doesn't matter. And what we'll learn today will help you discern your way through it. Not your way through it as in it will help you define what your opinion is about it. It will help you define the truth about it. So I always draw a triangle. That's just my thing because there are three sources of morality. We'll talk about them each in turn. The most important source of morality for any action, the most important question you can ask of any act at all is, what is it? What are you doing? What are you acting upon and how? That is handled by the object. This is the most important, most defining aspect of any act. You can get into other aspects in a moment, but first you must know what the act is. What are you actually doing? And that must be specified. So for example, hitting. Let's say I have a baseball bat. Hitting is not fully defined yet, is it? What do I need to define whether what I'm doing is good or bad, or even to describe my act properly? You need to know what I'm hitting. Am I hitting a baseball? If I'm hitting a baseball, then I'm playing baseball. Am I hitting a rebellious student? Well, then I'm not playing baseball. I'm assaulting someone with a weapon, right? What is the difference? Same baseball bat. I might even have the same motive. But the difference is what I'm actually acting upon. So when you think of object, you can think of the objects in a sentence. You can think of it grammatically. So let's say the cat scratched the dog, let's say. This is a little pedantic, but it's just in case you're afraid of the word object or in case it seems a bit foreign to you. It's actually quite direct and clear and simple. The object in that sentence is what? The dog. So the object of a sentence grammatically is that which receives the action of the verb, right? The direct object, that which receives the action of the verb. So in morality, it's exactly the same. It's that which receives the action of the actor. So for example, some actions are changed depending on, well, all actions are changed, depending on what their object is. And that's not a matter of opinion, it's a matter of fact. And that's actually how our entire legal and moral system is built in most countries in the West. I'll give you an example. Most students come to us thinking that killing is bad. That's probably the most common thing I hear is, why is it okay to kill in a war, let's say if the war is good? Or why is it okay to kill if someone is invading my home, but it's not okay to kill normal people? Well, it's because the word kill in that situation is not a properly, fully defined act. It's like saying, Mr. Elliott, is hitting bad? Well, hitting what? Is yelling bad? I mean, I don't know. That's too vague. What are you yelling? When are you yelling? What are you actually acting upon? It's not fully defined yet. So how do we define murder? Murder is the killing of an innocent. How do we define self-defense? Not by the situation, not by the circumstances, and not by the motive of the person trying to defend their family, but by the object of their action. Am I defending my family with physical force against an attacker or an innocent person? Or let's say a person wanders into my yard, they're a little bit confused, maybe it's a child or something. If they wander into my yard and I physically assault them, then what have I done? I've assaulted an innocent person, I've assaulted a confused person, and I'm defining that by what I'm acting on, the object of my action. Not my motives, nor the circumstances, but the object. Now, if someone attacks my family, they become an attacker. They're a different object now. They're acting against my family. They're an enemy. So killing an enemy, killing a criminal, let's say in an execution by the government, those things are more specified than just killing. So that's why we have words for them, like capital punishment and an act of war. So it's not like killing is bad most of the time, but in the case of a just war, or in the case of self-defense, God sort of winking his eye and going, well, I just won't look at that, or, oh, I'll give you an exception this time. God is perfect, and the eternal law is eternal. There aren't any exceptions. There are no lifting of the boundaries. The good is what it is. God can't deny himself. What it is a difference of object in each scenario. So you cannot ever kill the innocent. You may defend against an attacker using force, even if that ends up being deadly force. Those are the differences in those actions. So the object is said to speciate. That's a little bit of a fancier word. It just means that the kind of action that we're talking about is determined by its object. Let's say a crazy person charges at you with a knife. And they're deranged, they're under a hallucination. They believe that they are a doctor and that they're performing surgery on you. They're a cardiologist, they're going to help you. Are they in fact a cardiologist? How would we check that against reality? What is the difference? They might appear to be doing, if you get it down to just the material physical stuff involved, the same thing that a cardiologist is doing when he performs open heart surgery, or heart surgeon rather, is doing. They might seem to be doing the same thing, except that what they're doing is they are a madman acting on an innocent person with a healthy heart, as opposed to a doctor acting on a person with a defective heart. What's the difference? What's the difference between maiming and healing in medicine? What's the difference between taking a drug that is treating a disease and taking a drug recreationally? Well, the disease, right? The object that the action is aimed at, the object that it's working with there. If I have a defective organ, then cutting out that organ is not mutilation. That might be healing, because that's possibly the only way to cure that. You see how this works? The object speciates the act. The object determines what your act actually is. And that's really not that complicated. You actually probably don't even need someone to tell you that, because you kind of have an instinct that that's true. Right? Our entire system of Western law is based on that. How do you know whether an act is criminal or not? Well, you put the act itself with the receiving object, and you determine whether it's towards the good or not. So all we're really asking is a very simple question. Before we say, okay, we'll complicate the scenario with all kinds of twisted motives and difficult circumstances, before we say all of that, we're just saying, wait, what is the actual thing involved? What is the act? Another word that you may see surrounding object is malum ex objecto. These Latin words mean bad by its object. Some actions, by virtue of the act and the object meeting, are so disordered, so inappropriate, so contrary to the truth about the good of the human person, that those acts can never be ordered towards man's good under any circumstance. It's more like an elaboration or an emphatic point for the church to say this than really necessary, because by what I've already said, you should be able to draw that conclusion. For example, the killing of an innocent person can never be justified. But this is the church's way of emphasizing that there are certain things that are so bad that you should never look for any justifying circumstances under which to perform that action. Now, there's not like a collective list, but some things are described that way as grave or gravely disordered by their object. For example, abortion is described as malum ex objecto. There's never any circumstances or motives that could ever justify an abortion. So get it out of your mind. The killing of an innocent child is never justifiable. There are others. Usually they involve the breaking of a commandment, right? Adultery or blasphemy. There aren't any way to justify those kinds of actions because the object they act upon is inappropriate. It's wrong to, let's say, blaspheme against a God who is holy and good. It's never going to be right. There's never going to be a situation in which you might have to do that. So if you ever see malum ex objecto, that's the church's way of emphatically saying that. Okay, there are some other of these malum ex objecto acts that I want to talk about. One of them in particular always sort of stifles my students just a bit, because if there's one thing that everyone in the whole world knows about, it's the Nazis. And everyone always wants to say, so if the Nazis are at my door, and I am hiding Jews in the attic. What should I do? It's like the only two things people know is that there were Nazis and they were bad. Oh yeah, and there was this one book called The Diary of Anne Frank that I read once. So what should I do? Well, it turns out that lying is an act against the truth. It's always wrong to speak a lie. It's, in other words, I'm not giving you a commandment. I'm not saying you'll get minus 20 holy points if you lie. I'm not being casuistic. I'm not being deontological. I'm saying the truth is what your mind and your mouth were made for. In the same way that your stomach was made for food and not for sand. So you don't need a commandment to realize that if you eat spoonfuls of sand, it's not going to be good for you. Your life is going to tell you that. Your stomach is going to tell you that. You could even know that without experiencing it yourself, because you could look at the stomach and say, well, the nature of that thing, the purpose of that thing is to digest food, not to digest sand. But you can do the same thing with the mind. The knowing mind, was it made to know truth or to believe lies? What about the mouth? Was it made to speak the truth or to speak lies? In other words, for what purpose do human beings have the rational ability to recognize and speak truth? Is it to manipulate the truth and to deceive others, or to learn? If you want a hint, you can just ask yourself, when was the last time you enjoyed being lied to? No one does. When something is revealed as a lie, our reaction is sadness or anger or disappointment, not satisfaction. Now, we're trying very, very hard in modernity to enjoy being lied to. We're trying really hard to make some of our most deeply treasured lies come true. But it's not working very well. You might think, well, what if a person is like just really deceived? For example, would you, for example, if you were a woman and you want to ask your husband, do I look pretty in this dress? Shouldn't he go ahead and say, oh yes, you absolutely look pretty, even if you look awful? Something like that. Like, what if you want to be deceived? Well, our wants are a little bit complicated. I bet underneath that want to be deceived, there's a want actually to be beautiful and to be told that she's beautiful, right? Like, it's almost impossible. I would say it is impossible to want to be deceived. It's like trying to force yourself to believe in Santa Claus when you know there's no Santa Claus. And you just really, really want to believe. You can't force yourself to believe something. Belief is an act based in the intellect and the will. And you can't force yourself to believe something that you secretly know isn't true. Although many, many people are trying in the modern era. Anyhow, I'd like to talk just for a moment about lying. It deserves a special mention. It's not good to tell a lie. It's contrary to the good of the human person. What is a lie? If you want to be technical about it, St. Thomas gives us a definition. He says, a lie is a statement at variance with mind. A statement at variance with mind is a lie. And it's never good. It's never according to the truth. It's a lie. Why? What's the object of the lie? You're not acting on the other person. That's the indirect object. You're telling a lie to a person. So that's an indirect object. What's the direct object of a lie? It's the truth. So it is never good to use our ability to know and speak the truth to do precisely the opposite. That's like trying to use your eyes to be blind or trying to use your stomach to digest sand. It's contrary to our nature. Well, then what about the Nazis? What about the Nazis? The Nazis are at my door. And what am I supposed to do? Say, oh yeah, upstairs, turn left. There's a false wall. Just knock on it 3 times and you'll find them right up there. Absolutely not. It's a false dichotomy. And I get so tired of it because it's really situationalism. You want to try and put me in a tough situation that forces me to act for the best consequences, right? Instead of acting on what the act actually is, you want me to try and get the best outcome by any means necessary. It's a false dichotomy. You don't have to choose when under threat between either compromising the truth and lying or becoming victim to the threat. There are other options. People think that the Nazis were the first people to ever threaten anyone and try and get the truth out of them by extortion and violence. That's a human universal. People do that all the time. And early Christians, we call them martyrs, early Christians faced precisely those pressures to deny Jesus Christ. Well, they could easily have lied and said, I'm not a Christian, and survived in the earliest years of the Roman Empire. In the first 3 centuries, when Christianity was persecuted, at least in many regions of the Roman Empire, they could have survived. They could have apostatized. They could have given up their faith and then said they were sorry to God later. It's an insult to every martyr for us to say, well, I was under pressure in this situation, so I kind of had to lie. I couldn't speak the truth. It's an insult to those who died as a witness to the truth. That's what martyr means, witness. And so we have the audacity to cook up scenarios to justify our lying. But then what am I supposed to do? Well, it's actually quite simple. A person who's assaulting you or threatening to assault someone else, or an attacker, does not have the right to know every single piece of information in your mind. So one option is to not answer, or to simply say, I'm not going to reveal the location of the Jews, or to say, you shouldn't be doing this, or to stand up and protest. How many times do we have to hear about Nazi Germany and the Holocaust and desperately wish, like the movie Schindler's List, desperately wish that the few people who did act against the Nazis were multiplied? How many times do we have to wish that more of the German people stood up and resisted this movement of hate? Or how many historical situations do we have to bring up where we wish that people had told the truth instead of lying? There's a fascinating footnote right in the beginning of Alexander Solzhenitsyn's The Gulag Archipelago. I think it's in the very first chapter, if I remember correctly, but I remember the content of the footnote very well indeed. He says something like, how did this happen? How did this come upon us? How could the system have failed us so catastrophically? He says, it was our fault. It was our fault. We didn't love freedom enough. That's an exact quotation. We didn't love freedom enough. He concludes in the Gulag Archipelago that it was the Russian people who were responsible for the Soviet Union and for Stalin and for the bad things that happened. Why? How could you? Why? If there's anybody you could pick as a villain to just point a finger at and say, no, that was the guy, it would be Hitler and Stalin, right? How can these evil men not take all the blame? Well, because it's little compromises in people's desire and ability to tell the truth that allowed these wicked men to prosper and do what they did. Imagine if a huge portion of the German people had risen up and said, I'm not going to cooperate with you at all. I don't need to lie to you. I'm just going to say, I won't cooperate with you. I will not tell you. And I will physically defend the innocent. That's another option that you could take. I will physically defend the innocent. So just because I'm saying it's never acceptable to lie, by the way, that is right there in the Catechism. It's also one of the 10 Commandments that you shouldn't bear false witness. Right? So it is a grave issue. Just because you can't lie, it's never good to lie, doesn't mean that it's always good to tell every truth you know to just anyone. Like students love to ask about my family life and my personal life sometimes, and I don't mind sharing some things with them, but of course there are some things that I won't share with them, or that I'll just avoid the question, or I'll simply say, that's kind of private, I don't want to share that. And there's nothing wrong with that, actually. That's good judgment, right? It's called discretion. So you can be discreet. You don't need to lie to cover up everything. You know what lying is? Lying is an attempt to reach into the mind of someone else, to reach into the future itself and manipulate it. And it seems like in the scenarios like the Nazis, like a lie is going to go really well. Like if I just lie to them, they'll go, oh, okay, thanks for talking with us, and then move on down the road, and then you get to keep running your shelter, secret shelter for the persecuted Jews. Almost never do things work out that cleanly for the liar, do they? Aren't liars constantly in fear that their lies will be revealed? Don't small lies usually build up into bigger lies? Even the smallest of lies. Why? Because they are habits. They build habits within us, right? If a person lies in a small way, it becomes a little easier for them to lie in a bigger way. And anyway, this goes for every single sin. But it just goes to show you that there are some actions that are so disordered that we ought never to consider them, that they take us and the people whom they affect further away from God, not towards our final end of beatitude. Okay? The second part of the moral act, the second source of morality, is intent, sometimes called the end of the act. This is where many moral theories start, not the Catholic moralities, but this is where some moral theories start. It's like, well, it depends very greatly on what your intent is. Now, intent is basically what meaning you give to the act yourself. Let me read you a definition from the Catechism of the Catholic Church on intent. This is what it says. The intention resides in the acting subject. Because it lies at the voluntary source of an action and determines it by its end, intention is an element essential to the moral evaluation of an action. The end is the first goal, And the intention indicates the purpose pursued in the action. The intention is a movement of the will toward an end. It is concerned with the goal of the activity. Intention is not limited to directing individual actions, but can guide several actions towards one and the same purpose. So, intention is an essential element of every action. It's what makes our acts human. If you've ever been in high school, then you'll know there's a big difference between walking down the high school in a hallway and you feel, a bump on your shoulder. Someone hits you in the shoulder with their shoulder, and you turn around and look. There's a really big difference between the friend who's goofing off with you, and you look back and you're about to get angry, and you see that it's your friend smirking at you. Okay, well that's funny. Why? Because your friend is intending to joke with you, so he's trying to start up a game with you, basically. Whether as opposed to if you turn and you see someone who actually is annoyed with you or trying to start a fight. So what someone is trying to do, what meaning they put into their action, is also important. It's not as important, so to speak, as the object. It doesn't determine what the action is, but it is important. And our laws also reflect this in the majority of Western countries too. This is why we have laws concerning like differentiating between first, second, and third degree murder, for example. Was someone's full intention and will behind this murder? Or was it an act of passion, instant? Did someone conspire to commit this evil deed? Was it thought out and planned over a long period of time? Was someone drunk when they performed some act or some crime? If so, their guilt may be lessened. Now, don't get caught in the weeds. Keep your feet on the ground here. We're not spinning up fables. This is not icing on the cake. We're not making things up. This is actually very intuitive. The questions we've asked of every moral action so far is, what are you doing and why are you doing it? And those two things make up almost the entire totality of what we're concerned about when we discuss any human act. The intention should be towards the good, right? So intention is what you intend, what you purpose, what you mean by the action, and it is also important. And strings of actions, as the Catechism has just said, strings of several actions in a row can be guided by one intent. So basically, if you're a human being, the thing that differentiates you from a dog or a vending machine or anything else, like a vending machine that fails to give you the candy or the Coca-Cola is not taken to court and tried. A vending machine is just kicked. A dog who makes a mess on the floor, it's treated much the same way. People do scold them. They probably shouldn't. It doesn't make a lot of sense. But we don't make them write sentences promising never to do it again. Why? Because what we're concerned about is what was done and why. Those are uniquely human things. They make a human action. There's one more aspect, though, that we have to look at, and that is circumstance. The circumstances of an action are important. The circumstances are the where, how. In other words, by what means was an action done? Was a robbery done by theft and stealth? Or was it an armed robbery with threats and violence? Well, that matters, right? Were you reading a book in Mass during the homily, or were you reading a book in the quiet of your home? Are you eating meat on a fasting day when everyone else in the church is fasting, or are you doing it as part of your regular weekday routine, eating with your family, etc.? So there are some specific questions that circumstance answers. Questions like where, by what means, etc. You can think of circumstances as the setting for an action, in every sense of the word setting. It's like the stage upon which the action occurs. Now, very importantly, neither intent nor circumstance can justify a bad object. So, if we're doing an action that is objectively wrong, something that's objectively bad, let's say having an abortion, or maybe you're the doctor who's performing the abortion, often those things are done with good intentions. The road to hell, right? Often those things are done in circumstances that are somewhat desperate. But the most important thing in every action, and you don't really need the church to tell you this if you have clear reasoning skills, then you'll know the most important thing is not why you did something or the circumstances under which you did it, but what you actually did. And there is no way that a bad act can be redeemed just by the intentions of your mind. Morality doesn't exist just in the head. Keep your feet on the ground in reality. Like, live a life that makes sense. So you can't just do something terrible and say, oh, well, I didn't really mean to do that. Or do something terrible and say, well, but I was in a really tough spot. You don't understand. And suddenly the action becomes good. The action is still bad. However, we can say of circumstances and intent that they can lessen guilt, lessen culpability. Now, I am very hesitant to introduce this because modern man is so obsessed with culpability, guilt, and mental intentions that often he's so eager to get to these things that we actually forget what we're doing in reality. I don't want that to happen. But, okay, yes, if I... let's say if I accidentally run over someone, like I said before, well then, yeah, obviously my intention wasn't behind it. They're still run over. They're still injured. There's still something bad that happened. I still have to deal with that. But if it was completely unintentional, that's why we have a category that doesn't call that kind of homicide murder. We call it manslaughter, right? Or whatever, right? So circumstances, for example, can be like desperation or perhaps extreme poverty or fear could overwhelm a person in certain circumstances to cause them to, let's say, do things that they shouldn't do. But it can lessen their guilt, but it doesn't turn the action suddenly into a good act. Right? Finally, in Latin, the phrase describing how these three fit together is this: bonum ex integra causa, malum ex quocumque defectu, which I won't write on the board in Latin, but I will write the English translation. It means an action is good from the whole cause, bad from any defect whatsoever. That means for an act to be good, I need the right act on a good object with good intention under the right circumstances. That's really actually not that much. That's not asking a lot. It's really what we all hope for when we're at our best. We want to do the right thing for the right reasons at the right moment. If I am feeding the poor and the circumstances are good, the circumstances are the poor need food, but my intention is to be seen or to get fame, then of course the action is undermined. You probably don't need me to tell you that. We have a strong intuitive sense that this is true. I can do something very good, like a student wants to do his homework. That's a good object. Perhaps their intent is to get good grades and to learn the truth and to understand more about the world that God has made, or maybe even God himself. But there are times when I shouldn't do that. For example, a time set aside to spend with family. And you could have done it earlier, but you didn't. So now what's wrong? Not the object, not the intention, but the circumstances. The when is another thing that can go under circumstances. There are locations where actions aren't good. So you see what I mean? Good from the whole cause, bad from any defect whatsoever. Any one of these three things going wrong means that the action is not good. It undermines the truth about the good of the human person that is in the action. Now, one last thing before we go. I want to contrast this way of understanding morality with a massive error. Rather, it's a family of errors called consequentialism. You'll notice that we've been examining morality, we've been examining the act for what it is. Consequentialism is a way of evaluating the moral action, not in terms of what it is, but in terms of its outcomes, in terms of its effects. So this is where you get things like the trolley problem, where there's a runaway train, you're the only one on the train, you can't stop the train, but you can switch the tracks. And there's one person on one side and 4 people on the other side. Should you switch the track? Different scenarios that people spin up like that. It's where we get things like, well, I could have this abortion, but it's going to save the mother's life and she's going to go on to have 5 more children and populate the world with 5 more wonderful people. Consequentialism seems pretty good if you don't think about it too closely. Actually, it's the morality of every villain. You just have to think about it. What does every madman, every tyrant, every wicked person think that they're doing? They think they're doing the world a favor. The world would be better off if we just didn't have this kind of person in it, or if this nation would just be crippled and weakened, or if they became part of our empire, or if I could just do this, then the consequences would be wonderful. I can bring about utopia if I just kill these 60 million people. Now, that sounds shocking and obvious to us, and we go, whoa, 60 million, that's way too much. But how often does consequentialism show its head in medicine? Well, if we just take the stem cells from this aborted fetus, we can create a vaccine, and that vaccine will save millions of lives. Or if you just have this abortion, then we can fix your other twin will survive. In cases of twinning, abortion is often encouraged, especially if it goes above twins into triplets. You need to choose one of these children to abort so that your other children will survive. Or, this person is unconscious, their situation doesn't look good, but if we end their life, if we euthanize them, we could harvest their organs and they might save 20 lives. You see, consequentialism is based on judgment by what comes after. And actually, consequentialism is present in the whole Nazis and the lying scenario too. If I can just tell this one lie, then I will save 10 Jewish lives hiding in my attic. Why do we want to do that? It's the morality of every villain. It's even the morality of our villains in fiction. If you think about even something silly like comic books and superheroes, what is the morality of every comic book villain except a very few? You've got like the Joker, who just is bad because he wants chaos and there's not much motive behind his actions, and that's sort of the point of his character. But what is the point, what is the morality of every comic book villain? And what separates them from the hero? Why can't Lex Luthor be a good guy? Because even though he wants something good, even though his intentions are good for humanity, he wants to do one evil thing so that he can get there. Or maybe he wants to do a bunch of evil things so that he can get there. We don't do that. In fact, it's in Scripture. We do not do evil so that good can result. In other words, we never do something that is bad, that is intrinsically wrong, even if it has good effects in the future. Why not? What if the good effects are really tempting? Because then you become the villain. There's a reason why Superman can't just kill Lex Luthor. That's why I think that story is great. There's a reason why the superhero can't just murder the villain. Because then he becomes the villain. There's a reason why in warfare, in just good warfare, and yes, there is just warfare, there's a reason why we can't just do anything. We can't just release a biological weapon and destroy our enemies. We can't just drop a bunch of hydrogen bombs and nuke them all out of existence. We can't use mass deception and propaganda and wickedness. We do all those things. That's why most of our wars are not just. But you can't do that because then you become your enemy. And even when you defeat them, they're still present in the world because of you. And now what I'm saying sounds an awful lot like something like Tolkien or something. Like, why can't Gandalf just put on the ring and become the ring Lord? Why can't he do that? Because then he becomes the Dark Lord. It's a source of power, yes, but it's a corrupting source of power. Yet we dramatize this in myth and lore and fiction all across our body of literature as humans, and we intuitively know that it's true. But when it comes down to us, all of a sudden we want to make exceptions. And we want to say, just let me do this one thing. And then I'll bring about so much good. It's self-justification, isn't it? This is not just abstract moral theory, you see. It touches every aspect of our lives. What if we all understood that our actions are not determined by our secret motives, but reality actually matters? What if we understood that we couldn't twist or bend reality, even if just for a moment, and we tried to live the good and the true in every way, in every action that we take, everything we put our will behind? What if everyone in the world started acting that way? Well, then we'd have a world full of saints, wouldn't we? So the structure of the moral act, the sources of morality, can seem a little bit like we're making an action technical, like we're trying to parse everything out, or the typical Protestant accusation sometimes that we Catholics get it. We're sort of arguing about how many angels can dance on the head of a pin. It's kind of an old scholastic attack. We're not doing that at all. I hope you can see we're not doing that at all. In this, what we're trying to do is use prudence to illuminate what the church has revealed about morality, what Christ has revealed about morality. How many times would it have been very easy for Christ to bend his messianic mission to serve himself? That's precisely the nature of the devil tempting him in the desert. Turn the stone into bread. Satisfy your own needs. Worship me and I'll give you everything. And of course, Christ resisted all of those. And so we're called to do that as well. We're called to resist temptations, not give in to them and bargain with the devil to try and get something back in the future. So that is the structure of the moral act, the sources of morality, as they're called, in Veritatis Splendor. And it is imperative that we evaluate our actions in truth rather than evaluating our actions by what we hope or expect the consequences to be. If we do this, we're saints. If we do this, we're villains.